Nothing like spending Friday night watching over my city. Nothing is better than that. Hello everyone, I'm Batman, and tonight I'm going to be replacing Multiverse to explain to you where to assign your skill points if you are a controller. But first, what are skill points? In DC Universe Online, we have something called feats. And as we play the game, we gain feats. As you can see, there's a whole bunch of categories of feats: general, solo, duos, seasonal, episodes, all that good stuff. If we look in general, for example, you can see that there's a feat for using the breakout ability. Then there's a feat for breaking 5 exploding barrels. Then there's a feat for breaking 5 orange barrels. So there's a whole plethora of feats that will give you skill points. Each feat will give you a certain amount of feat points, and once you reach 100 feat points, you gain 1 skill point. As an example, here you can see 1,259 feat accomplished. But those 1,259 feats translate into 291 skill points. And full disclosure, personally, I don't care about skill points very much. Skill points don't make a hero. The hero makes the hero. Skill points are just icing on the cake. And even then, I've seen some pretty good cake with no icing. In this Universe Online, I've seen a lot of great players who barely had 50 skill points. So if you're a player that doesn't have that many skill points, don't worry about it. Just enjoy the game and have fun, and you'll do fine. So where do you put your skill points? Obviously the first place is your weapons. In this case, we're going to take a look at hand blasters. For most weapons, it should be pretty similar. Normally you purchase all the weapon combos that you can. But you can see here in this case, Multiverse doesn't like to use the scissor kick, so he did not purchase that ability. At the end of the day, as a controller, he doesn't use his weapon all that much, so it doesn't really matter. Then you have to put points in your movement mode. In this case, flight. So you can see Supersonic has been purchased. Then any one of those abilities here needs to be purchased in order to be able to purchase the rest of the abilities. So in this case, Swoop Attack was purchased. Why Swoop Attack as opposed to maybe Dive Bomb? Because Dive Bomb, sadly, whenever you fly down, it happens that you break healing barrels without meaning to, and then you end up not having a healing barrels for the rest of the fight. So instead of putting a point in Dive Bomb, which would make some sort of sense, the point went to Swoop Attack. And that 1 point is only for one purpose: to gain access to the various resistance and recoveries, and the breakout mastery. It may not seem like much, 10% restraint resistance, or 10% stun resistance, but it does add up. So basically you have your skill point that will give you some resistance, but then there's going to be, for example, let's say the tank in the group will give you resistance that will stack on top of that. And you may have your own abilities that will also stack and give you more resistance. So roughly the 10% itself isn't that much, but it does add up to various other abilities that could give you more resistance. Then there's the iconic powers. Purchase any iconic powers you like, doesn't really matter. The one iconic power I would suggest maybe is Super Strength, because it is really cool to be able to lift a tanker truck and throw it away. But it's not very useful. As for the stats themselves, this is going to be similar no matter what controller you are. If you're a Quantum controller or a Gadget controller or a Green Lantern controller, doesn't matter. You can build pretty much all the controllers the same way. Bear in mind, this is what I suggest to you, but you can do anything you like. Although technically, I guess you have to do what I say because I'm Batman. So for your stats, you have to choose one of three focuses. There's the weapon expert focus, there's the hybrid focus, and there is the super powered focus. If you play a controller, I strongly suggest to use the super powered focus. The main reason for that, very simple, you get 25% power regeneration if you go into super powered focus. So you will regenerate your power faster. The 10% might doesn't hurt, and the 10% power isn't bad either. But the 25% power regeneration is the real reason why you want to take super powered. As a controller, technically you do three things. You give out power, you apply debuffs on enemies, and you do crowd control. Ironically enough, the crowd control is the thing you do the least. There is this phrase that I like to use. There is room for things to mean more than they literally mean. In the case of controller, even though the role is called controller, the controlling part is probably what you do the least. The reason for that is quite simple. Sometimes if you apply crowd control to a group of enemies, it may happen that you make the job of the tank more difficult than it should be. So ideally, you let the tank do the crowd control that it needs to do. And then, if there's some additional crowd control that's needed, let's say a bunch of enemies will jump on the healer that the tank wasn't able to crowd control, then obviously you crowd control those enemies. But if the tank has the situation well in hand, then let him do the crowd control and focus on giving out power and on applying debuffs. So in order to be able to give out power, there's a few things you're going to do. The first thing is that you're going to put 20 points in critical power chances. It will give you a plus 20% critical power chance, which means you will be able to do critical powers more often thanks to that. It will make more sense in a minute when I show you how to give power. Then you are going to put 10 points in critical power magnitude. Basically what this means is that when you are going to do a critical, when you give out power, you will give 20% more power. And then comes Vitalization. Vitalization is the main stat for the controller. The reason for that is quite simple. It is the stats that decides how much power you give back to the group. There were people at some point who wanted to put points in might and power instead of Vitalization. Their argument was that with more power, you're able to cast your abilities more, and technically it should allow you to be more effective as a controller. I don't agree with that. Personally, I much prefer when controller put points in Vitalization so that they can give out more power to the group. There's another stat that is seen as essential for the controller, but as you can see, I didn't put a point in it. The reason for that is quite simple. The controller gear gives you all the dominance you need. So if you're wearing a full set of controller gear of the appropriate level, you don't need to put points in dominance. I will show you why. Here you can see that just with my gear, my dominance is 8,907. If we look at the on-duty menu, we can see that the highest level missions require 7,838 dominance or 8,882 dominance, depending if you're playing the regular version or the elite version. And that is true for both missions, as you can see. So as you saw, with my controller gear alone, I have all the dominance I need for the top missions in this Universe Online, and basically I have all the dominance I need for every single missions in this Universe Online. So if you play as a controller, your gear alone gives you all the dominance you need. And even more so, you can see that the gear I'm using right now is a combination of the Son of the Manta and the Enhanced Primeval gear. So I don't even have the Atlantis gear yet, but already I have all the dominance I need to play the Atlantis missions. So as a controller, you shouldn't need to put points in dominance. Your gear alone should be able to give you all the dominance you need. So this is what I would suggest to you, no matter what controller power you use. Superpowered focus, 20 points in critical power chance, 20 points in critical power magnitude, Vitalization, and once you've maxed Vitalization, then sure, put points in might and power. And if by some small miracle you've maximized might and power, I would suggest put points in health. Extra health, never a bad thing. But at that point, doesn't really matter. You could go for critical attack chance, you could go for critical attack damage, you decide. As long as you've maximized your Vitalization, you'll be good. So let me burn a bit of power and I'll show you how you can give power back. So as a controller, every 5 seconds you give out a tick of power. And the strength of your tick depends on how much Vitalization you have. As you can see, roughly with the amount of Vitalization I have, I give about 800 ticks of power. I do have a trinket that I can use once in a while that gives me 1500 Vitalization more, almost 1600 Vitalization more. That roughly translates into 100 power more per tick. So as you saw, with roughly 14,000 Vitalization, I give roughly 800 ticks of power. Now, I will ask my friend Green Lantern to do a demonstration for you. Thanks, Batman. Hi guys, I'm Power Ring, and I'm here to show you what happens if you put your points in power as opposed to Vitalization like Batman asked you to. So here, as you can see, I've done the opposite of what Batman said. Instead of putting points in Vitalization, I've put points in might and power. Again, the idea seems to be from players who want to maximize everything, and this way they get a 2-for-1. For each skill points that you put in might and power, they increase 2 abilities, as opposed to with Vitalization, they only increase 1 ability. So a lot of people who want to maximize everything are putting points in might and power instead. Also, they're probably trying to be a combat controller, meaning that they're trying to be a controller and also a DPS at the same time. So they're trying to give out power, but they're trying to do extra damage at the same time, thanks to having points into might. So let's take a look at what happens when you put points in might and power instead of Vitalization. And for that, we're going to need to burn a bit of power. So you can see my tick of power are roughly around 700. So 100 less than our friend Batman with Vitalization. But the idea is that I will do more damage thanks to having extra might, and I will be able to cast more power because I have more power to be able to do so. So here, as you can see, I have a little less than 12,000 Vitalization, but I almost have 50,000 power, which should allow me to cast more power. But my power over time is 100 less because I have less Vitalization. And I have roughly 23,000 might, almost 24, which would allow me to do more damage. But sadly, that is part of the problem. There are controllers, or there are lots of players who are so focused on doing damage that they don't do their job properly. So there's a lot of controllers who are so focused on trying to do damage that they forget to give out power. They forget to debuff. So I would strongly suggest do what Batman asked you. So if you want to be a DPS, no problem. Switch to DPS, equip DPS gear, put skill points into DPS abilities, and that is good. But if you want to be a controller, then give out power, debuff, and put your points in Vitalization. So this is Powering signing out. Batman will take it over from here. That was strange. When did Green Lantern change his name to Powering? I don't get it. So as you saw, guys, Green Lantern gave 100 ticks of power less than I did. So every 5 seconds, the group gets 100 power less. With 8 players in the group, that's 800 power less every 5 seconds. It doesn't seem like much, but when you have a mission that lasts 30 minutes, there's a lot of 5 seconds in 30 minutes. So at the end of the mission, you could be missing out on 1,000,000 power out because you're giving 100 less every 5 seconds. Also, at some point, DC Universe Online added artifacts. And some of those artifacts benefit from you having high Vitalization. For example, Parasite's Power Harness will give power equal to a percentage of your Vitalization. And it will give also to the group Precision equal to a percentage of your Vitalization. So the higher your Vitalization, the more power and the more precision you will give to the group. The same with the Entwined Rings of Azar. You will grant health equal to a percentage of your Vitalization. So again, the higher your Vitalization, the more you will grant health to the group. So again, as you can see, I have about 14,000 Vitalization, but obviously I have 20,000 might and 40,000 power. So roughly I have 10,000 power less than Green Lantern. But I have more Vitalization. If you want to be a DPS, fine, put points in might. But if you want to be a controller, Vitalization is where you should put your points. So I hope this made some sort of sense. If not, just ask in the comment section down below, and I'm sure Multiverse will answer your questions if he can. Although that was a bit strange. Power Ring. Wait a minute. The CSA. Ultraman. Owlman. Oh my god. And even my costume. Oh my god. I'm on Earth 3! How could I cross the multiverse without noticing? But that can be easily arranged. Ah, much better. Now, time to go back to my Earth. Should have known I was in the antimatter universe. Ah, much better. Home sweet home. So, that's going to be pretty much it for now, guys. As always, thanks for watching, and hopefully we'll see you guys next time.